Women in Film. Our time starts now.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining us tonight for this panel on women in film, a very timely conversation if you've been following the news at all. My name is Jen Proctor. I'm an associate professor of screen studies at the University of Michigan-Dearborn and a filmmaker myself. And I'm very happy to have with us three panelists that will be sharing some of their experiences and challenges they've faced and accomplishments they've achieved as women working in various facets of the film industry. So I'd like to introduce the panelists, and then I have a little bit of context and information to share about the current state of, or current status of women in the film and television industries, and then we'll open it up to a panel discussion. So to my left is Danni McClellan, who is a writer and director living in Detroit, Michigan. Her professional career began as a production assistant before quickly rising through the ranks and working as an assistant director. As a writer, her scripts have been finalists in multiple nationally recognized screenwriting festivals, including the Atlanta Film Festival. After splitting time between New York, LA, and Detroit, Danni founded her Detroit-based production company, Stanislaw Films, in early 2017, directing 2 short films before the end of the year. Her first comedy short, Heads Tails, is currently finishing post-production and is anticipated to premiere at festivals later this year. And Danni is also one of my colleagues at the University of Michigan-Dearborn, and I think it's probably okay that I say that she's going to be heading off to graduate school to study directing here in the fall.
Yes.
So welcome, Danni. Thank you. To her left is Jasmine Rivera, a director, writer, and producer and actor from Detroit, Michigan. As a narrative filmmaker, she has written, directed, and produced media via her company On a Whim Productions, as well as 4 narrative films, including Nine Rouge, which won thesis honors at Columbia University, numerous awards for Best Short Film and Best Director, and screened at film festivals around the country, including the Uptown Detroit Independent Film Festival, Great Lakes International Film Festival, and Cinetopia Film Festival. Her latest narrative short is American Prophet, set in 1968 Detroit and based on the true story of peacemaker Bishop Thomas Gumbleton. Jasmine is the recipient of the Laureen Arbus Scholarship from the New York Women in Film and Television Organization, was a junior professional media fellow at the United Nations Organization, a Detroit Sundance Screenwriters Lab fellow, and a recipient of the prestigious 2014 Kresge Arts Fellowship in Film Award. And to her left is Andrea Claire Morningstar, an Emmy-nominated filmmaker working in both Detroit and New Orleans, Louisiana. Andrea has taught filmmaking at Interlochen Center for the Arts, the Maine Media Workshops, University of Missouri-Columbia, University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, Milwaukee Public Schools, and Detroit Future Schools. Her short films, photographs, installations, and performances have exhibited in festivals and galleries in the U.S. and abroad. She has also produced several stories for radio, print, and web. So again, I thought I'd start by just offering a little bit of a snapshot of the current status of women in the film industry, which, as you might guess, is still a little bit bleak. Women represent still a very tiny portion of behind-the-scenes roles throughout television and film, and still have some problematic representations on screen. So just looking at a few of these statistics, looking at a set of 14,038 content creators in 2016. Of all of those content creators, women made up 4.2% of directors. There were 38 female writers, or 13.2%, and 20.7% of those were producers. Looking at the top 250 films of 2017, there were 18 women directors and 82 male directors. Oops, wrong way. Of over 700 films and 779 directors between 2017 and 2014, only 28 women worked as directors. Several of them made several films, but there were still only 28 women out of those 779 directors working. And you can kind of see maybe visually over here on the side, the historical comparison of percentages of women employed behind the scenes on the top 250 film roles. So 11% directors, 11% writers, and importantly, looking from 1998 to 2017, those numbers have been pretty stagnant. So very little has changed from 1998 to the present day in terms of representations of women behind the scenes. It's also the case that the director's chair tends to be predominantly white and predominantly male, so that 5.2% or 64 of 1,223 directors were Black or African American. 3.2% of them were Asian or Asian American. Of the 64 Black or African American directors, 4 of them were female. Of the 39 Asian or Asian American directors, 3 of them were female. So again, just kind of giving us a little snapshot of the numbers. And within that, when we do have female directors behind the scenes, Hollywood's kind of idea of who that is a white woman. So of the 43 unique female directors across 1,100 films, 36 of them were white. 4 were Black or African American, 2 are Asian, and 1 was Hispanic or Latina. So again, even when women do kind of rise up behind the scenes and are able to work as directors, they're still predominantly white, which suggests some of the other diversity issues that Hollywood has behind the scenes. Looking at on-screen representation, so some of the characters represented on screen, if we look at the percentages of females and males as major characters, again, this is in the past couple years, 63% of characters are male. If we look at the percentages of female and males as speaking characters, any character that says something on screen, 66% of them are male, 34% of them are women. So just in terms of the number of characters that speak on screen, it's still more male characters that are doing the talking than female characters. Similarly, if we look at a historical comparison of percentages of all speaking female characters on broadcast network programs, so looking at television, again, we can kind of see that the numbers have stayed pretty much the same from 1997 to 2017, where in 2016, 2017, 43% of those female characters, 43% of those characters were women, 57% were men, and looking back to 1998, those numbers were still pretty much the same, 39% women, 61% men. Again, just another kind of way of looking at on-screen representation, the prevalence of female speaking characters across 700 films. We've actually seen a decline since 2007. So 2008 was a better year. 2008 and 2009, 32.8% of characters had female characters had speaking roles. But in 2014, we saw that drop again a little bit. So again, the numbers are staying pretty static. And if we look at sort of larger pictures of diversity on screen, it gets, as you might imagine, a little bit more marginalized when we start introducing other aspects of identity to the characters. So of the top 100 films of 2016, the number of films with no Black or African American females was 47%. Of no Asian or Asian American females, 66%. Films that had no Hispanic or Latina females was 72%, and films that had no LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender females was 91%. So when we start adding these other aspects of identity into the picture, then those numbers diminish significantly. So I wanted to offer those statistics not to be discouraging, but to present kind of a realistic look at what's happening in the mainstream film and television industries right now. And I think as we hear from our panelists, we'll start to hear some challenges that they've faced, but also some ways in which they've met those challenges, and ways in which a lot of female filmmakers are finding ways to work outside of the mainstream film industry as a way of carving their own paths. So to turn it over to our panelists, I think I would just like to start with a simple question. Just very briefly, if you could talk about how you got started in filmmaking and really what the path was that brought you to where you are now. I know asking you to be brief about that is a challenge, but do the best you can.
Well, my path is kind of already in my bio that you read. I was a student at U of M-Dearborn. I was actually one of Jen's students also, in addition now working with her. And I was fortunate enough to start college in my early 20s as opposed to as a teenager, and it coincided with the Michigan tax incentive. So I basically took full advantage of that, hit the ground running. She nearly flunked me a couple times because I was skipping class to go work on set and racking up production assistant credits. And I worked my way up the ladder, dabbled in other departments. I worked on a Ann Arbor-based film in the costumes department and tried a few things out. But I really loved being in production and thought that that would be my path until we lost the tax incentive. And I had a crisis, as I think anybody does when the rug is pulled out from under them like that. I didn't want to move to Atlanta to keep working on movies that I found very challenging. Independent films for assistant directors are the peak of stress, and assistant directors have a very short lifespan. It's like more stressful, earlier death rate, like on comparison with accountants and things like that. So I was like, I don't really want to keep doing that. Started screenwriting again, and then fell in love and finally embraced my desire to be a director, which brings us basically to present, I guess.
And I'll just mention real quickly, if you're not familiar with the tax incentives that Danni mentioned, some of you may be aware that a few years ago, Michigan did put in place some of the best tax incentives for filmmakers in the country, which lasted like 6 months or something like that, before it was pulled out by the Snyder administration. But for a while, there was a huge boost to film production in the state, which a lot of people benefited from before that was kind of taken away.
Yes.
Okay. Jasmine.
I didn't start off in film right away. I was a theater kid, did it throughout high school and college. I went to the other college, MSU, and told myself that I was going to go to law school and be a lawyer and make my parents happy. And I moved to New York, and I worked for one of the big major law firms. Decided I did not want to be one of these poor people when I grew up. I was still doing theater downtown and started working on a few films that my friends were producing, and I got hooked. And with the stories that I was writing and interested in actually producing, I knew they were too big for the stage, so modifying them for the cinema seemed natural. And so I applied to a bunch of different film schools, and then I got into Columbia, and that's where I've been since.
Andrea. Excuse me. I've always been interested in too many things, which I think is also apparent in my bio. I just realized as you were reading it. And film was the place where all of those things converged, and I felt like I could do everything and not miss out on anything. And I'm still finding that to be the case. I started doing experimental films and then found more of a comfortable place in documentary work. And that's primarily what I do. I've found that I could make a living doing documentary work. So I have had different iterations of a film career. At one point I thought academia was going to be my safe place, but being an adjunct for many years taught me that that was not going to be my safe place. And so I went back to having a production company full-time and in Detroit, and then worked for PBS for a while, and now back to independent production. So, yeah, but I just love the way that it is theater, it's writing, it's photography, it's research.
Absolutely. Great. So to launch right into the thick of things, I wonder if you all could talk about the challenges that women face in particular in the film industry. And I think that there's a couple kinds of challenges that women face and other marginalized groups, which is one, just a barrier to entry, right? Just getting into the industry to begin with, and then specific challenges once you're there, if you've kind of broken in. So I wonder if you might share any particular challenges that you've encountered or that you've observed, and maybe any thoughts about how you met those challenges behind the scenes.
Yeah, for me, just when I walked on set for a lot of movies, I was mostly surrounded by men on the crew side of things. I'm still kind of exploring my way into being a director and how that's different in terms of getting funding and finding support as a female director and female filmmaker. But on the crew side of things, I didn't feel any sort of pushback in terms of being a female to get in my first job. It was more in relation to what kinds of roles were being offered to me or being granted. Even within the assistant director department, it's essentially just stereotyping of like, oh, there's one production assistant that's at base camp where all the trailers, hair and makeup people are, and hair and makeup and wardrobe are all relatively, compared to other departments, female dominated. So the production assistant that's at base camp is like, oh, well, you need a girl there. They're better at people managing. They're better at knowing how long those things are going to take. And I found myself being, or same thing when production assistants work with extras to get them through the works, as we call it. Typically, those positions go to young women as opposed to men because there's this just inherent bias, subconsciously usually, that they'd be better at that role. So I found myself being put on a track because of my gender, rather than it causing any sort of impedance in terms of my getting hired. But it did put me on a specific path that, I've kind of had to sort my way through more recently as I've been changing my role in film. But you guys can probably speak a lot better about the difficulties of getting funding and being at the helm of things from a female perspective, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I could speak to that, but also just in New York, I worked a bit as an AD for some freak reason. There was, I worked on one project, and then a lot of people liked me, and I started getting other projects, and it was something that I was totally not anticipating because, as Danny said, it's one of the most stressful jobs on set. So for those who don't know, the AD, the assistant director, is the person who actually commands the set and wrangles all the different departments and communicates with all the different department heads. It's not the director. The director is left to one side to hopefully think about the shot and the art and all that. So it's your job to kind of shield the director from all of the disasters that are constantly happening on set. And so I would get challenged a lot by crew members just because you are commanding the set. And here's this little girl who's doing it. And I got a lot of, passive-aggressive sort of attitudes, and then a lot of mumbling under people's breaths and a lot of challenges. At a certain point on one set, I had to throw a couple guys off, and I had to be escorted by the other men in the crew going home that night because they had threatened me on the set because they didn't want, someone telling them to do who was a woman. So that from the crew experience, I think I've definitely felt that really chillingly, sort of exclusionary sense that as a woman, you should be working in hair and makeup and costume. You're not qualified to command an entire system that is very complex and in need of authority. So I think that feeling kind of carries on to the larger thinking where it's like, well, guys can do the big action flicks and the huge studio blockbusters. Let the women do the smaller independents that are, the touchy-feely and romantic comedy, things like that. But the complicated stuff, let's leave that to the guys. And so I've kind of seen that correlation from that standpoint.
And Jasmine, when you were encountering that as an AD, how did you deal with that?
I threw them off a set. So it's just like, I'm sorry, you can't slow us down. Time is money.
I love that.
And you gotta go.
That actually makes me think of an incident that happened when I was a second AD, where the second AD is the one actually writing the schedule all day, and they're stuck at a desk and helping make sure the actors are getting ready and just prepping the next day as things are constantly changing. And I had somebody, a male DP, come up to me that was trying to explain something to somebody else and literally took a pen out of my hand in order to, at my desk, and take a pen out of my hand to draw a diagram to explain the 180-degree rule to the female script supervisor that he was kind of challenging. Yeah, it was a very bizarre situation. And it led to me just snapping because it was an incredibly stressful shoot. And I got up, walked back over, grabbed the pen out of his hand, and was like, "Really? You can't just I literally have pens everywhere. I'm an entire office. You can't just say, hey, Danny, do you have a second to give me a pen? I would like to continue this conversation and have a diagram while I'm talking down to this young lady that you trained and want to or about to go stick up for." And I was like, really? And I wound up having a huge falling out with this guy who had been a friend. But he came, this is a happy ending. He did come around a couple months later, and we worked on another job together, and I was really unhappy about working with him, and he apologized. He had done some work on his own. This is way before Me Too happened, so it was not prompted by anything else, but he recognized he was being kind of a sexist jerk, and he is talking about me behind my back for, all the names that women get called when they're strong and authoritative, and saying I was on my period and that's why I was cranky and things like that. And he apologized for all of it, and everything I've heard about him since, he is much kinder to everybody on sets and much more relaxed. And that was, I totally understand where you're coming from with the female AD being challenged. This was such a daily occurrence for me. I think I forgot how often it happened, to be honest.
Andrea?
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to approach it from a slightly more internal space and say that I've experienced that there's a necessary degree of hubris to make anything happen in the film world, because you're doing the impossible every time you make a project, and you're asking for a lot from everybody who's involved, whether it's a documentary subject or a funder. And I think that that hubris comes more naturally to people that are part of the club who are in power, and that's white men. And the rest of us have to learn it and are a little uncomfortable with it. It doesn't come as naturally to us. And we also want to rewrite it. We want to do it in a different way, in a way that shares power, in a way that is about leadership rather than control. And I think that that's a big project. I have to make a movie and I have to rewrite what power looks like on set, and redefine it and create community while I make a film. It's a lot to do. And, that's with the barriers that we already statistically have. So, so one of the things that I just did like a little artist retreat with a dear old friend of mine and collaborator this week, and we had to keep reminding each other. Like I was talking about an assistant editor that I'm working with, and I'm like, I think, I should pay her more. I should pay her more. She's doing a lot of work. I should pay her more. And she had to remind me, did you talk about the contract beforehand? Yes. Is she really excited to work with you? Yes. Is this a good opportunity for her? Yes. Let her worry about how much she's getting. That might not be the best example, but we had to keep reminding each other to be confident and bold in our choices, and that's I think that's something that's particular to those of us who are not white men in film. I mean, speaking broadly. So, and some of the practical challenges around, what is my film structure going to look like? Do I want, is it going to be the same? Do I need the same roles? And, I think that's something that I'm asking every time I make a film, and that's a big challenge in addition to the challenges that are already there.
So I think you touched on some really important points, I mean, all of you, but these last few points that you made, Andrea, about some of these more internal or psychological barriers that can affect women trying to get into film. And so even things like women tending to be socialized at a young age away from technology, right? Being kind of raised to believe that technology is more the realm of the masculine, and that women kind of, as you say, belong, doing more domestic kinds of things or using softer skills. And so I wonder if there's other barriers like that you see that are filtering women out before they even kind of get to the point where they could be joining the film industry. Even looking at film schools, for instance, female film students often pursue like the producing path, which is more of kind of a social and organizational skill, and drop out of cinematography tracks, which tends to be a little bit more technical. So even though there's a lot of women that are graduating from film school, they're often already, like before they even get out into the industry, going towards one track or another. And so I wonder if there's other barriers just to entry that you've encountered or that you've observed, or sort of why is it that women are having, that there aren't more women in the industry? And that's a huge question, I'm sorry.
That's a lot to unpack.
I just thought you might have some insight, so I threw it out there.
For me, that's actually something I've written about frequently in like sort of blog posts and articles, is why it took me until I was 30 years old to, even though I've wanted to work in film my entire life, I was writing plays when I was 6 and like had all these little schemes to make ripoffs of Dazed and Confused when I was in high school. Why I didn't recognize that meant I wanted to be a director. And I think the biggest thing that stopped me from seeing that was my aspiration was I didn't know any female directors doing the kind of movies I wanted to do. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be Kevin Smith and Richard Linklater, and I wanted to make like Empire Records, and for a while I wanted to make like just ridiculous, silly like bro comedies, to be honest with you. But the female filmmakers I knew, while amazing filmmakers, I love Clueless. Emily Heckerling's great. That's probably one of the only female filmmakers I could have named as a teenager, and that wasn't the kind of story I wanted to tell. So I didn't know, I hate to say the word allowed, but I didn't know women were allowed to tell the stories that I wanted to tell. And I don't want to make Jane Silent Bob movies anymore, but without have like all my role models when I was a child and wanted to be in film were men. So I automatically discounted like, okay, well then I'm not the director, I'm something else. And then I was kind of put into the producing track by how I behaved in school, and I always had leadership qualities, and I kind of got put into that track when I was an undergrad, and I also got put into that track on set by being a good AD and being very organized, and it just I didn't let myself consider it until I had to, and it just was like this huge epiphany light bulb. It was like falling in love for the first time of just really understanding what I'm supposed to do in film, and everything has gotten better since then. But there was like a huge mental impedance there.
I think it's safety and money.
Yeah.
We don't feel safe. We like to plan. There's so many unknowns in filmmaking, and it's this huge leap every time you make a film, and the people who have the purse strings are the people that have power over us and that we don't trust, and it's scary. It's scary and hard. Mm-hmm. And when you don't feel safe, it's hard to walk up in front of people and say, yeah, give me $2 million to make this documentary, and I know exactly what it's going to be about when you haven't even shot anything. Right, yeah. And I'm going to deliver it to you by a certain time. So,
Yeah, I think making a film and having a story to tell and the will to actually follow through and make it, it's a very belligerent thing, I think, because it does take an enormous amount of work, time, effort, and you are expecting things. You are telling people, I'm great, give me money. It's just like that sort of thing where I agree with Danny that not having seen any examples growing up and not having that sense of entitlement, I think, is a very subconscious barrier to a lot of women who feel like you need to ask permission in a way to do things. And for me, where I was lucky enough to land at Columbia, which has a remarkably women-driven program. So we've got a lot of progressive professors. Catherine Bigelow came out of Columbia, and there was never a sense of, oh, here's the ladies over here. It was very aggressively feminist. And so I kind of was shielded by that in school, which is different in the real world, definitely. So for people who are starting out, who don't necessarily get that experience, it's like they're waiting for permission to actually begin something and to make their own art. And it's just like, you just need to go out there and grab it. And that sounds very bratty. That's how, women kind of think, oh, I don't want to be that person. But it's just like, there's no other way of doing it at a certain point. And of course the balance is like what Andrea is saying, do I have to be, that stereotype of the hyper-masculine sort of, demanding figure, or can I just be free to be entitled in the way that I am as a person, as a woman, things like that. But I think definitely that it is scary. The thing is scary. So whenever I see people who have made a film and maybe the film hasn't gone anywhere, or it's just, it's screened locally at whatever, community center, whatever, that's really hard to do. Congratulations, because not a lot of people can achieve that. So yeah, it's a big undertaking.
I think just doing anything going into production just taking that step is such an accomplishment in and of itself. And I think everybody in the film industry is so easy, like, it's so easy to say, like, oh, that's not a big deal, it didn't do anything, but, like, the amount of, like, mental anguish that you have to go through to take that leap and actually make your set. And whether you're putting all the money on credit cards, or your parents gave you money, or you crowdfunded, or whoever, or nobody's making any money and you did it all for free on your iPhone, just that mental impedance of actually making something is present no matter where you come from in the film industry. And I think that's something that I've really tried now, kind of being an educator myself, to talk about with students, is just do it. You have to just do it, and you have to give yourself the permission. Nobody else is going to give it to you. You have to be your own advocate and forge your own path, and you're not going to know what that is every step of the way. And I particularly try to, like, seek out the enthusiastic female students so that they have the same support that I was fortunate to get in that position. And I think film school is one avenue where women are much more supported than when they have to crawl and climb their way through the ranks, because in general, if you're crawling and climbing your way through the ranks out of the muck as, like, a PA or an intern on set, very few of those people, if they have ambitions to be directors, there's not a hierarchy on set that leads specifically to being a director. You have to forge your own way to do it, no matter where you're starting from. But the environment, I feel like, if you start in an academic program to get into film, there's at least a nest of comfort and support for most women that I know that have come from that background in film.
Let me ask the audience, do we have filmmakers in the audience? Okay, fun. Do we have aspiring filmmakers in the audience? Okay, cool. Okay, that's helpful to see. So a handful of folks. So this might seem like an obvious question, but I want to throw it out there anyway. Why is it important to have women behind the scenes and writing and directing films? Like, why is it important to have diversity in the writer's room? Why is it important to have diversity on the film set? Why are we fighting this fight? And Andrea, maybe we start down on your end.
Oh.
Changing things up a little bit.
Because because who do we have? Everybody's consuming media. Why is only a small part of the population controlling it? So it'd be nice if what we were seeing was more representative of who, of everyone.
Mm-hmm. And there's certainly a lot of assumptions about who the audiences are for films, which often ignores the dimension of diverse audiences. And Black Panther, I think, is a film that is showing what some of the myths were about who audiences are and breaking those myths.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think making sure that we're getting authentic voices involved, just because if we are just getting our source material from one particular part of the population, it's not dependable as a reflection of reality. I was just thinking about this the other day. I worked as an actor for a while. I'm not active right now, but I still have an agent and I get roles. And for the most part, I still get all of the accent roles because they're looking for an Asian person with an accent. And then my boyfriend, my partner, is a theater director, and I got into kind of a spat with his company, not with him, but they were putting out audition notices for a particular role, and they needed a Korean-American actor to play a Korean-American character. And I asked, is this person required to speak in Korean? What exactly are the parameters here? Because I'm not really seeing in other casting notices that they're looking for particularly German-American, white men or, Swedish women, things like that. Why are we suddenly put into a box of ethnicity that's so specific that it's also locking out all these other Asian women who don't get any opportunities? And so we had a conversation about that, and people understood, and they changed it. But again, I was coming from a situation where I said, I'm sorry, I may feel very passionate about this, but it is a personal thing. I personally have to deal with these situations. So only I can articulate this sort of perspective to you. And so it's something where when you're writing a screenplay, when you're representing characters, when you're trying to do the impossible, as Andrea said, in making a universe within your film, you need to make sure that it's actually grounded in something true. And so it's very paltry if we only get one type of experience, and it's not rich enough for us. And I think the world deserves better in terms of what we are consuming.
And the narratives we're making and consuming end up creating reality.
Right.
And it's this loop. What kind of reality do we want to live in? What kind of reality do we want to create?
Yeah, it's absolutely a feedback loop, and I'll echo what both of you already said, and just the more diversity you have behind the scenes, the more authenticity you can lend to any sort of story. Only Andrea can tell the stories that she's going to tell. Only Jasmine can tell the stories she's going to tell. Only I can tell the stories that I'm going to tell. And that doesn't mean that other similar stories don't exist. I have a short about the Nain Rouge too, but our films are entirely different, I'm sure. Like, mine's a ridiculous, horrible student film, but and hers is award-winning. But we took a subject matter and we told completely different stories because we're different people. And everybody has stories, whether you're a filmmaker or you're a writer or a journalist or you're not. If you're an accountant, you have stories. And there's people from everywhere that come into TV writing in particular to serve as consultants. And that's how a lot of diversity has been infused in the TV writing room, is through consultant work. And that happens because there is even though there have been all these blockades, there is an inherent understanding amongst even the most cynical TV critics, or not critics, but like network people, that you need authenticity in storytelling. The audience can sniff it out when it's coming from a disingenuous place, and your story is it's better and it makes them more money, which is really what the network people want. So
are there stories that aren't being told that you want to tell in your work? Like stories that just aren't being represented anywhere in the mainstream that is something that you would like, a story that you would like to tell, either that you're working on now or something in the future?
I don't want to answer that first.
Jasmine, I think you haven't gone first yet.
yeah, you're taking it first.
Well, right now, currently, I haven't optioned the book yet, so it's kind of silly. But I started working on a draft of a feature based on the work "America is in the Heart," and that is a classic work on immigration, and it was written by Carlos Bulosan, who is a Filipino who arrived in California in the 1930s and became involved with the labor movements there. And it's just the experience of Filipino Americans coming to the U.S. and how they were treated and how they navigated their world. And so this is something that I've started and stopped and started and stopped, but right now it feels like something that I really want to do. So yes, coming from an Asian American background, I think I definitely want to help tell those types of stories where it's like we're constantly seen as the perpetual foreigner, even though we're totally interwoven into the history of this country. And I have that totally American background of being raised in the Midwest. I've got, a dog, and my parents took my sister to soccer practice, and it's very, universal, but I don't think people know that it's universal quite yet. And then also speaking as someone who has grown up with multiple health conditions, I think there needs to be much more inclusion for people who have disabilities, who are seen as "quote unquote" handicapped. I think that type of representation is missing, and I would love to hear more stories about that experience and to have that visibility so people can feel they're also part of this fabric too.
Yeah, I also grew up with a lot of chronic health issues, and I still deal with them on a, unfortunately, too regular basis. While I don't want to make stories that are specific to any issue, my intent with a lot of my work is normalizing disability and mental illness as well. I don't there's a lot of movies about schizophrenia, for example, that is the crisis point for the character. A Beautiful Mind comes to mind. But that's not everyday life for millions of Americans who have mental illness. My dad was a psychologist, so I've had an interest in mental health issues, and he's a wonderful advocate for the community. So I've always had an interest in treating that as just another thing that's a part of a person's life, rather than creating a story that centers around it. So there's a feature that I'm writing, and I'll probably do like a proof of concept short for it, about a teenage girl at summer camp who's it's pretty normal coming of age, but she's bipolar, and her bipolar is prominent enough where she hallucinates, and she hallucinates the camp Bigfoot legend, and he gives her bad advice about how to grow up. So I like to, it's kind of wrapping that mental health in a package where it's just part of her life. She's not struggling to tell her friends. She's not having a crisis moment. I keep using that word, but it's part of her everyday being. But at the end of the day, it's a coming of age story about a girl at summer camp.
It's a great question, and I'm struggling with the question for on another number of levels. So I am working on a feature documentary right now about a school in Detroit that is a school that's in a underserved part of the city, and it's got a place-based curriculum where the neighborhood is really integrated with the curriculum in every way, and it's a K through 8 now. K through 8 now, and so if they're learning science, they're using the puddles in their neighborhood to find out, what happens to the water, where does it go? If they're studying civics, they're talking about Detroit politics. There's no shying away from the reality of the neighborhood that they live in, and it's a very process-based school that really looks at the moment right in front of the students as the most important moment, not some unknown future. And they're redefining success as not having to leave Detroit in order to be successful. But what's my point here? It's very process oriented. There's a redefinition of learning as something that should be uncomfortable, and that this discomfort means you're continuing to grow as a person and be inclusive and hear stories that may be hard to hear and create community. And it's really been an inspiration to me to think about how that's where I'm growing the most, and how to kind of maintain that discomfort, that struggle, that's the sweet spot, to have that, discomfort as part of my everyday life. And I think I want to see more stories that come from that space, and I don't know what they look like, and I don't know who's telling them exactly. I've gone through a big thing with mine where I'm like, I shouldn't be telling this story. I'm a white woman from Ann Arbor. What am I doing in this community? And at one point I walked away from the story because I thought somebody else should tell it, but nobody else was telling it. So I came back. I also had a producer who was a woman of color say to me, "Shut up, go make that movie." And she has a mentor of mine who has worked on a similar subject. But anyway, I'm struggling because I can't say, I don't know exactly what those look like, but I know the place they come from. They come from this place of process. They come from this place of redefining what success is and what power, and looking at power from a new perspective. Yeah. Whew. Got there.
Yeah. So kind of continuing on this idea of process, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, so challenges and obstacles can, of course, lead to wonderful things, right? They can lead to new approaches to creativity and problem solving and figuring out a way to carve your own path. And so I wonder if that is something that's happened in your process, is have the obstacles that you've encountered as a woman filmmaker resulted in some kind of growth or some kind of achievement? Has something come out of that?
It's like my entire bio is bad things keep happening, and then I make things.
So tell us about that.
Well, there's obviously the tax incentive stories. So the way I founded my production company and shot my emotionally most ambitious short film, because it's the most character driven, Heads Tails, that's in post, was I got rejected from like 3 grad schools 2 years in a row. I was butting my head against the wall. Just it came down to, my direction came down to writing not the most genuine statements of purpose, and they could see through that. Or just, I bombed an interview also because I was very symptomatic and like fumbling for words and twitchy, and yeah, it's a bad scenario. I'm starting to get that right now because it's been a long day. But I just completely failed, and I loved my job, so I didn't want to move. I loved being in education, and I was watching all these students around me be so inspired, so excited, loving the projects they're doing. I was like, I want to feel like that too. Like, I don't remember what that feels like. And I talked to a friend of mine that I had met at a TV writing workshop at Columbia, actually, and who was an undergrad student there at the time. And I was like, do you think I should direct this thing that I wrote? It's a very silly romantic comedy about 2 friends who wake up in the morning after not having a romantic encounter to find that the guy's goldfish is dead, and then they have a goldfish funeral. So just very silly, sweet story about friendship and life getting in the way. And I asked him, just like, I've been sitting on the script for literally years. I didn't trust anybody to shoot it because it's a personal story. It actually happened to me. And he's like, yeah, you should direct it. Like, have you met you? You're kind of a director, not a screenwriter. And I was like, oh, well, okay. This is somebody like I really value the advice of. He's won a lot of screenwriting competitions and so forth. And I just kind of started asking everybody else around me, like, why am I not doing this? Why am I not doing this? And nobody had an answer. It's like, really, why are you not doing this? So I did it. And we crowdfunded after we shot, so I could give something back to the crew that volunteered their time, and so I could also lock them into the schedule, because I don't want to take anything away from my friend's income, because there's not a lot of job opportunities here for crew currently. And we made a really nice, sweet film, and I love it. And it's exactly everything. It was the first time I got something out of my head and was able to show it to the world the way I wanted to. And everything just all the clouds kind of dissipated from my brain, and that's when I was able to say, like, oh, I'm a director. Cool. I'm going to keep making stuff. Which is why I'm in grad school. Have finally gotten to grad school rather than twiddling my thumbs for the last 3 years. But yeah.
So, Jasmine and I co-founded a group called Final Girls, which is a collective of women who are filmmakers in Metro Detroit. And it came about from thinking that there were no other women filmmakers in Detroit. And a friend from California actually hooked us up, and we went out for drinks, and then between us realized that we each knew some women filmmakers that the other person didn't know. And so we decided to start inviting them all to that same place to have drinks. And it grew to a membership of, what do we have, like, we only really have like 15 active members, but we have like 40 members. And we've got a night grant, and it's been going on for a few years. And I think this community has grown up around the scarcity in Detroit. And by scarcity, I mean, I don't know if there's really scarcity as much as like people get really siloed and think that they're alone and think that there isn't resources because of kind of the nature of the city. And then we get together and realize that we have a lot of shared interests and collective power. And so I think that's been a success that's come out of hardship.
I want to start coming.
Oh, yes, please do, please.
I've been meaning to.
Yeah,
but
we're trying to
feel
figure
like
out where next week's meeting
it's
is going to be.
required now.
Yeah,
I need
yeah,
to.
yeah, absolutely. It's an awesome group of ladies.
Yeah, I think Final Girls is one. It's interesting because I was in New York for so long, and I came back to Michigan to shoot the last short that I did, American Prophet. And I came right when they obliterated the tax incentives, so it was pretty tough. It was right at the tail end. So basically, the crew that I got went from Batman versus Superman to my little tiny short, and then they all went to Atlanta. So I right now, just being in the city and in the state with everything that's going on, and having to scrounge around for professional colleagues and crew and things like that, it's been rather rough. And I get into this wheel of uncertainty where it's just like, I think I need to move back to New York, or I need to go join. A lot of my classmates went to LA and they're now working for Netflix or J.D. Abrams and things like that. So so it's just like, my God, why did I come back here? What am I going to do? But at the same time, it's really fueled my creativity because, again, it's speaking from that unique perspective and experience, which is being in Michigan, being a woman of color from this community, and witnessing the things that I've done. And I think it's brought me a type of satisfaction that a lot of my friends who did not go back home, they are working for, what used to be the Weinstein Company, but now it's just like they're looking for jobs. Anyway, so it's you're very removed from your own work once you're in the mainstream, and so I've been able to dodge that by coming home and insisting on making my own stories. So I would like to be paid as regularly as a Paramount employee, but I think it's a trade-off that I'm willing to do right now.
Yeah.
So it seems like a negative, but I think it's informed my work pretty well.
Great. So I wonder if you have any suggestions for resources or supports that women filmmakers would benefit from, or how we can go about advocating for one another, or for allies to advocate for women and other underrepresented identities to get into the industry. Like, what do we need?
I think getting rid of this sense of scarcity, and I mean there's enough. I think one of the things that happens, especially in Detroit, I feel like is, and this was me for initially when I was there, this sense that, okay, there aren't a lot of resources here, and I got to get them all, and when I get them, I got to make sure there's nobody else trying to take them, in terms of grants or in terms of whatever. And what I've found is actually the opposite, that the more we share those resources, the more we give opportunities to one another within this group, Final Girls, the more opportunities are created. And I don't mean that in a Pollyanna way. I'm seeing I'm like giving a production company, in a very real way, I'm seeing very real results from sharing opportunities with friends and referring other people to the same resources. It's bringing more resources our way.
Yeah, it's interesting because being working on so many mainstream, even though a lot of them were lower budget, but working in kind of the Hollywood system that was existing in Michigan for a while when it left, and I was struggling to figure out, like, I had all the resources to crew up. I just hired all my friends. I know all of that. I knew all the crew that was left in town that was professional, but I had no idea how to find a producer. So I just did it myself, or how to find, I did as much research online, I think the internet is a wonderful resource, but it's also it's limiting because it makes you feel like you're saying that you're alone.
Yeah.
And so I didn't find out about Final Girls until I think you told me about them maybe 2 or 3 months ago, and I was like, oh my God, like, they would have been so great to have known these other women when I was making this project. And there was a project that I shot in the fall as part of my applications that I was literally the only female on my own set because all the other crew, like female crew that I knew, had to cancel to go get paid. but it would have been, I think that having been on the outside of a group like that, I can only imagine the value. And if anybody here is hesitant to come to a collective like that, like don't think twice about it. Just
don't
come.
be
Just
precious
come.
about your ideas. Don't be precious
Yeah.
about your identity as a filmmaker. If you're making a film, you're a filmmaker.
Right.
Okay. And just don't let confidence get in your way. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a biggie. Just
And I think just taking that self-initiative to come to an event like that, even if you don't know anybody, or my game changing in my career as an AD job, I got it because the first AD on this TV show is canceled, but fairly big TV show for AMC. I found out that the first AD was a female, and I went on IMDb Pro because my mom pays for an account for some weird reason. So I used her account, and I found this woman's email address, and I emailed her and said, "Hey, so I've heard really great things about you, and can we get coffee?" And she's like, "I'll do you one better. Give me your resume, and I'll give you an interview. You say you want to be an AD. Let's see what you're made of." And she hired me. And that was how I really got that extra leap. And for every email that I've sent like that, I've gotten 2 opportunities to meet really cool women in the industry that I look up to. That's it out of 50 or more emails that I've sent like that. But play the lottery. Just see who answers. See if they'll just have a cup of coffee with you and can share their experiences and talk shop, because we all love talking about what we love to do. So just
one of my favorite moments at Final Girls was early on when we were still meeting at the Whitney Ghost Bar, and somebody needed a dolly. We have like an ask and offer part of each meeting, and somebody's ask was, "Oh, I really need a dolly for what I'm shooting and some track," and 4 people put their hands up and were like, "Oh, I've got a dolly."
Yeah.
And that was just, that kind of stuff happens when you put your needs out there and,
Yeah.
and dare to ask for what you need.
Yeah, just be daring.
Yeah.
Whatever opportunity you see, just try. It doesn't hurt. I swear.
And the Final Girls website is finalgirls.org.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you can find, I'm not sure that I put it on the handout, so you can write it in.
I think also just knowing that you are needed, and we need women filmmakers. You are in demand. We are rising. There has been for some time, but I think what's happening now is the strengthening of the Old Girls Network, because there is a lot of conversations between filmmakers across the country where it's just like, I'm shooting this project here, I would like to get a female producer or a female DP and things like that, just because I need to mix it up. I need to make sure that it's grounded properly. And so I think, being vocal about the fact that you are a filmmaker, letting yourself be visible about that, helps the little girl in the front row think in her head, that's what a filmmaker looks like. That's what a director looks like. And know that there are people out there who are in need of you. And so don't shy away from that. And, like I said before, just go ahead and find your sisters out there, and but also know that you have something that you are going to offer, and that you're not going to ask permission. You're just going to go after it, I think.
Yeah.
And I've found personally, like, social media is a wonderful tool to find those female filmmakers across the country. I've met a bunch of really cool women through Twitter, like showrunners of shows that are amazing. And like that's one of the 2 women that like I just reached out to, and she took me out to lunch. And like, all you can do is try. And even if don't feel comfortable engaging directly with them, there's a lot of wonderful conversations that happen on Twitter and Facebook groups and Instagram even now, of all these female filmmakers and all the hashtags. Like, just look at Female Filmmaker Friday hashtag and see who pops up, and whether you're just getting inspiration to know that these women exist, or you find somebody that you think is like-minded and you can reach out to them, it's something to keep you inspired, I guess, and keep in mind that it really is possible. It's not, you're not crazy. You might be weird, but embrace the weird, but you're not crazy.
This program was recorded on March 29th, 2018 at the Ann Arbor District Library.